This PowerPoint presentation is basically going to just discuss all the legislation of special education that has gotten us to where we are today. So let's get started. Alright, so the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of the 1973 included Section 504, and 504 is extremely important in the special education world because it made some great changes. Starting off, Section 504 requires that no otherwise qualified handicapped individual in the United States shall solely by the reason of a handicap be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So when this first came out, it didn't include some of the programs. However, it had been extended, and it now includes the programs of education, employment, health, welfare, and then other social service programs. So that was a good help. But more importantly to your child's education is going to be the Section 504 that requires any school that provides public education that does receive the Department of Education funds. It requires them to provide a free appropriate education to each qualified individual with a disability, no matter how severe their disability is. So that basically states that any child who has been qualified with a disability, no matter how severe or unsevere it is, that school district needs to make accommodations for that student and get them all the needed resources that they have. They cannot deny your child any services just because it is a severe disability. They need to make all the accommodations possible. So that was awesome. It's also referred to as the FAPE, and you'll hear about that in many other legislations of special education. Okay, the Americans with Disabilities Act basically took the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and made it even stronger to become the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, and it did a variety of things. The first thing that it did was it designated childcare centers as a public accommodation, and therefore they have to make their services available to anyone and any family who wants their services. Basically stating that they cannot deny someone based upon their disability. The only way that they can deny a child or family is if the child is a threat to themselves or to other children, if the facility cannot provide child care without it being undue burden, and lastly, the child care center would have to change the services it provides specifically for that certain child. This act then defined discrimination, and it included things such as segregation, inferior or less effective services, meaning that they took services that maybe other students were getting and made them, they were not as effective as what other students may have been receiving, benefits or activities, and then failure to make reasonable accommodations, so not making these areas available to people with disabilities. The last thing that it did was it had the U.S. Department of Justice revise the ADA regulations, or kind of building codes. So basically it set a minimum requirement for newly designed, constructed, or altered state and local government facilities, public accommodation buildings, commercial facilities to be readily accessible to and usable by individuals with disabilities. So basically it changed the building codes and requires new buildings to have accommodations so those with disabilities or in wheelchairs can easily and safely use their facility. Okay, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975 was probably one of the most revolutionary. It did the most changes and included the most benefits for children with special needs and disabilities. Basically, what it did was it ensured that all people from 3 to 18 would be provided that free appropriate public education, the FAPE, that we had previously talked about. And they specified that appropriate meant the education and their program would be designed for the student's age, their disability, their previous educational achievements, and then wants of the parents. Basically, the programs that they were in suited them. It was not too far below their academic level or too far above. It fit them and included needs that both the student wanted and the parents. This act then went in to specify that children need to be in the least restrictive environment. So these special education students are not just kept in the special education room. They're out with their peers. They're in other classes, engaging with other students. Some synonyms for these can be mainstreaming, inclusion, basically all referring to the same thing, that your student is going to be out with other students learning. And it requires that there's planning, and it's included in their IEP goals, and that the teacher that they're going into their classroom in the general education is doing some planning and modifying the lessons for your child so that they can get some academic benefit from it. So if the material that the other students are working on is a little too high for your child, modifications will be made, and it will be appropriate for your student. This also included the pull-out and push-in services. Basically, pull-out are those in which the child with similar needs are pulled out of their base classroom and met in a small group setting to meet their needs. And then the push-in are then when the specialist comes into the base classroom or the homeroom, the special ed classroom, and delivers the information that way. So basically, this act was revolutionary for special education students and their education. Alright, so the amendments of 1983 included Public Laws 98 to 199, and here's a few of the things that it adapted. It extended the fiscal authorization for federal aid to state and local school systems through 1983. It improved the process of reporting and sharing information. It increased assistance in programs for students who were deaf and blind. It financially assisted transition programs by allowing some certain grants to pass through, and then it added services for the children who are in the Birth to 5 program. Alright, so the amendments of 1986, referred to as Infants and Toddlers with Disabilities, basically set in and established statewide programs for early intervention services for infants and toddlers as well as their families. So basically their goal was to provide services that met those families' need for their child and the rest of their family. So if you were having troubles with this, these are a lot of great resources that they brought about for you and your family to reach out to. It included things that such as family training, counseling, physical therapy, case management, diagnosis, and confirmation with individualized family service plan. So basically their goal was to provide services that were often hard for parents to find and make it easier so that you and your children can get assistance.